introduction, we have another new staff and have neighbors couple who moved from Colorado Springs. They're on vacation now. Their names are Jake and Annie Peterson. Jake was a military guy, knew Al Engler, who's NAV neighbors and now NAV workplace, connected with me. They're here, so you'll meet them soon, but they're on vacation in Ohio. So we've had this gathering before, or fall launch, and I want to give a little bit of context. I hadn't thought of this until yesterday, but I've been in my role for a year now. It hardly seems believable, but I have been. And I want to publicly thank Bruce for just his gracious, kind, almost fatherly approach to passing the baton. He was on sabbatical for part of the time, but I've just felt like I've been given space and affirmed in my new role. But I thought I'd share a little bit about, I wasn't exactly a deer in the headlights, but I hadn't done this before. What I've been working on this year, I had a conversation with the Millers and Sherry Hall in May. We had a May month of prayer. Some of you who weren't a part of it, we prayed every day, but Sundays and Memorial Weekend, everybody had the opportunity to come and pray together. And at one of our last times, we were just sharing and talking, and I gave a little context to why I have this leadership team and what we've been working on. Because not everybody's on the leadership team, and that's kind of how teams are. So I'm going to share a little bit about that, but the first thing I felt like I needed to do last fall was to get to know many of you. So there were emails that went out, there were phone calls. I think I met with 27 of you in 60 days. So sometimes I was with Pete Katzung delivering food in a van, or I might have just been having coffee, or maybe with eight of you campus folks at the office. But I felt like I just wanted to get in your context as much as I could and hear about what you're doing. But then moving forward, I just like Bruce, I needed a team. My bias with teams is that the purpose of a team is to change things, which is kind of Bruce. Like Bruce likes changing things and coming up with ideas, and I think that's what leaders do. If a leader's job was to maintain things, I don't know that they'd be leading. But I can't change things on my own. I can't even come close, so I need a team. So there's prayer that went into it. And in a city, and just based on demographics with our staff team, I know I needed the campus guy on the team, so Trevor was on the team. And I wanted Alec on the team because 20s are kind of the gateway to everything else we do in a city. If we miss a step with 20s and 30s, it's really hard to recover as we think about stakeholders and laborers. So we prayed, we had an offsite. And I won't get into all the process, but we prayed and a team emerged. And that team included Jane, Luke and Anna, Trevor and Alec, as I mentioned, Abby, and that music's distracting me, Matt. And I'm missing one person, right? Well, Pam. Pam. So that was January or February. The bottom line commitment of the team is that they would meet monthly for 3 hours. There'd be projects they would be a part of, depending on their campus rhythms or the calendar. They may be working a lot on these or not at all sometimes. And they'd have to do studies and read because we wanted to learn about the city. And one thing I realized that maybe especially for campus people, because you have your own program, your own kind of in-house strategy, and you're doing so much good, you don't hear a lot of things from headquarters or NAV cities. So we took time looking at, well, what do the navigators want us to do in the city? What is a NAV city? There's documents that talk about that. And then, along with me, I just needed to learn about our city. I grew up in Partyville, for goodness sakes. So let's learn about our city. Let's look at the scriptures. Let's study our navigator vision and calling before we start trying to spin off ideas. And that process took 4 months. In July, we did an off-site retreat. Some of you went to the Family Fun Day at the Joneswald Cabin, which we're doing again next summer at Sugar Lake. We went there for 2.5 days, and we sought God and came up with really 2 overarching objectives. And I'm wondering if I have the PowerPoints in the right order. Well, that was one of the passages. So one thing we did is study Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah led change, right? And many of you have studied Nehemiah, you know the story, but the walls needed to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. And he went to the king, and he was afraid, and he presented it. And right when he's presenting it, somehow he prayed while he was presenting it. And then in chapter 2, We read, I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me, and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. So we decided we were going to be collaborative. There's 4 missions, I think, involved, or 5 on our team of 8. We were going to collaborate cross-missionally, but ultimately we knew it would take everybody in this room collaborating cross-missionally to move forward as a city. After we studied these documents, what the navigators want us to do, went to the scriptures, there were 2 overarching objectives or goals. We decided if we're going to give our time to 2 things in the next 2 years, these were the things we wanted to give our energy to. And I say 2 years because everybody on this team is either on a 1-year term or a 2-year. It's not a forever team. And some may go on longer, and some of you may serve on it next. But the first one is connecting, develop, and resourcing conventional income disciple makers. If you've read some of the branding emails, you won't be hearing the word laborer very often. I like the word laborer. It's in the Bible once. But if you talk to people in the city, or if you talk to people in blue-collar work environments, the navigators. People like Bjorn is going to do photography for us in the city, but he has another job in Plymouth. So they're laborers. That's not a bad word. It's part of that communication thing. We say things that are deeply meaningful to us, but if people don't understand what we're talking about, we need to adjust our language. Secondly, increasing engagement and ownership in our calling among people of color and indigenous people. Again, another wording thing, and Ryan and Jane helped me with this, and it's just true. Ethnic minority, it's not a bad word or a dirty word, but words evolve. There's been words historically that we've used to represent diversity and ethnicity, but primarily this is the preferred language of people of color and indigenous people, Native Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans. It's not that it's wrong if another word slips out, whatever. I'm only communicating this now because you're going to hear it more and more, and I want you to know what we're talking about. No one needs to feel bad. I still say ethnic minority in some context, but that's what we mean. When we think of our city, we think of a city that's 70% white and 30% not white. When we look at our staff team, the percentages are even further apart. There's reasons for that. There's economic reasons. There's our own navigator history reasons. But as we thought about this diverse city God's called us to, as we thought about the nations, at a bare minimum, our team should represent the people God has sent us to. But how do we unpack that, and how do we trust God for momentum in that area? And so what you're going to hear this morning are 3 different plans or initiatives for each of these goals in 3 different sections. So in just a minute, I'm going to invite Susie to come up to get us started, and you're going to hear about 3 initiatives for Goal B. And then we'll have a 15-minute time where you can decide which initiative touched your heart the most, and you can go learn more about that. So we'll summarize up here, and then you can go to a table and possibly get involved. And then after it, we'll have a potty break too. But after that table time, we'll do the same with Group A, Goal A, and then we'll have discussion time as well. Our hope is that you would learn enough to know how to follow up or to even possibly raise your hand to be involved in one of these initiatives. Susie, would you come on up? I'll introduce you, but I want to invite Susie up. There are people here who know Susie far better than I do. Bruce and Cindy, for example. There are people who've never met Susie. So I'm just going to briefly introduce this wonderful lady. I just learned after reading Susie's bio that she's been a navigator longer than I have, by at least 4 years, 1986 she says. Susie is from Kenya and has been involved in the navigators in Kenya, the Netherlands, England, in community ministry, campus ministry with internationals, primarily sometimes. And then Susie and her husband Steve moved to Minnesota. She worked at Northwestern. And what did you do at Northwestern? That I don't know.
I was director of economic technology.
Okay.
That was the top,
Yeah. And I had to write it down because I didn't want to miss it. This was an interesting tidbit. But while there, Susie developed a Bible study guide titled Redefining Beauty for the Woman of Color. I want to see that. I've never even done it. That was such a great fact. So Susie and Steve are up in North Branch. She's the CEO and founder of Veritas Academy, a classical Christian school in North Branch. Doing a great job there. A few weeks ago, Steve Shank was in town. Steve is the director of the Strategic Initiative Office, who's in charge of our WAVE cultural training. And he was here, and Susie came to a little luncheon, and we were talking, and Susie shared a little bit about her background and some of her experience going through cultural development. And I asked her if she would be willing to share that today, and she said she would. So Susie,
Thank you.
I'll get this started, but then it's yours.
Thank you.
Yep.
So as he said, I run a school, and one of the great things about running a Christian school and teaching in a Christian school is you can talk about creation. Let's go start by telling you a short story about creation. When God made the world, he gave the Americans the clock. He gave the Africans the time. So that's a little creation story. I teach that. Well, I kind of called my title The Race Game, partly because I don't really know how to title what I'm going to be sharing today. I feel like I've been in a race game since coming to America. One of the things that I've observed is that our life experiences, where we grew up, where we were born, where we were raised, who we played with, what our parents told us, shape our perspectives, shape how we might view things. So I grew up in Kenya. Oh, what did I just do?
Might have turned it off.
All right.
We'll get it back on.
All right, there. So how do I? Okay. All right. So you see little me. Picture of my brother and I with some of our neighbors. So I grew up with white neighbors, played with those kids and other kids just like them. Their house was like an open door. We walked in and out, went to their kitchen, their fridge, went with them for ice cream. Then when I became an adult, actually not quite, but I became a Christian at age 13, then was introduced to Navigators, or came across the Navigators in 1986. After that, ended up being discipled by a Kenyan lady for about a year. And then she had to move out of the town we were in, and then she handed me over to Patty Bogert, who she and her husband were Navigator missionaries in the town that I was living with. Among them, there were other Navigators, Bruce and Tricia Nygert, who are now back in Colorado Springs. There were some of the team that I worked with. The picture there on the farther end there is one of our Navigator gatherings. If you look carefully, you'll see the talking white Bruce Nygert somewhere there. But here it is, just to kind of give you a little bit of background. I was comfortable with playing with white people. I noticed they were different. I noticed their skin color was different. But that's about as far as I thought. Oh, I was curious about whether they went to the bathroom just like I did. But I never saw them as more human than myself, or I didn't see myself as less than human. So first forward, Patty spent about 3 years with me, investing in me, teaching me a lot of things. One of the verses I memorized was 2 Timothy 2:2, which you're very familiar with. The things you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, and trust reliable men and women, so that they too can teach others. I believe that's what it says. It's been years. But anyway, so when I went to Europe, I did the Good Navigator thing. I figured out who the country leader was in the country that I was going to, and I asked what was happening and joined the group. Then went to England, short after being in the Netherlands for about 6 months initially. Did the same thing in England, and connected with Dave and Heather McDowell. They were the leaders on the campus that I was in at the University of Leicester. Something was happening there. So I quickly noticed that some of my classmates in that picture were from all these other countries, and they were kind of lost. So I thought, hey, do you guys want to hang out with us? Come to an out group, come to our meetings. So I started bringing them to the Saturday night activities, and we just hang out. I mean, there were so many cultures represented. I've got a Greek guy there, 2 Palestinians, South Korea, North Korean. Actually, no, not Korean. I think there were 2 South Koreans. Nigerian, Filipino American. So during that time, my Filipino American friend asked me, I said, I admire your faith. Can you help me come to know this Jesus? So I took her to a corner in the middle of the room, and just at the corner when others were still in the middle of the room talking, and we prayed, and she gave her heart to Christ. It was just great. Thank God for Facebook. I am reconnected with all but 2 of the people in that picture today. And it's just great to be able to pick up on where we left. The Filipino American, lives in San Jose right now. I don't know that she's actively working with the Lord, but it's great to just be connected with them. Went back to the Netherlands after about a school year there and moved to another town, different from the one I'd been before, and again joined the group there. And while there, during that time, this team of Dutch folks just welcomed me. And in fact, pretty quickly, they asked me to help lead part of the ministry, to work with the women. So these are some of my experiences there. The middle picture, those 3 girls were girls that the Lord allowed me to pour into their lives. One of them is, actually 2 of them are Dutch, and the other one is Russian. And just loved it. The other picture there, that was my house. My house became the place for everything happening. So on Saturdays, we'd begin with playing soccer in the afternoon, then we'd have dinner, and then we'd do Bible study. I was comfortable working among the white people, never thinking about my skin color, never thinking about my race or anything like that. And I'm just about to run out of time. Welcome to America. I come to America. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Susie, you're great.
But I came to America. I did not think about race until my very first experience met this guy that I was dating. He's the reason I actually ended up deciding to remain in America at the time. I'm glad I did. But his mom told him he's gonna get rid of that girl. Because Africans dance around pots of boiling water with missionaries in them. You can't be with her. So I just laughed. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. And then his friend, who I later became aware she was a graduate of Bethel, but this was in Alaska at the time. She tells him, in fact, the Bible forbids interracial dating. In 2 Corinthians 6:14, do not be equally yoked. I thought, wow. So still not being aware of anything race related, I just laughed at their ignorance. Didn't let it bother me. But again, I met a few white people, mostly from Europe, Czechoslovakia, former Slovakia, and Latvia, and all those places. I began to work with them and do Bible studies with them, and it was just great. Before the Navigator cross-cultural development training, I'd only experienced similar training during my initial years at Bethel. And my experience had been very negative because, as you've seen, I'd become very comfortable working and living with white people. Bethel introduced me to what they called cross-cultural or racial reconciliation groups. And it was a weekly lunchtime that you'd meet and talk about race and what was happening. After about a month of attending these meetings, I had to quit because I noticed that after those lunch meetings, I'd begin to second guess every experience I encountered. I'd go to the store, and if a store worker happened to walk by, I'd think, oh, are they following me? Is it because I'm black? So I thought, no, this is changing me. I don't like this. And I thought, this is not healthy. I don't want to be part of this. So when I first heard that the Navigators were bringing in this training, I thought, no, don't do this. It hurts people. It makes people see things that may or may not exist. And so the first training, about 2 years ago, I sat in, I thought, okay, well, I'll just go through this because I want to be a good navigator, I want to participate. And I listened. And yes, at the end of that session, some of you might remember, I shared some things I'd written down. I felt that some of the conversations made me feel like perhaps we were not seen as being capable of doing certain things. For example, issue of transportation. I thought, wow, are they saying that we can't figure out that if you need a job and you need to get to it, you need to figure out transportation, you need to buy a car and get there? Are they saying that we're not capable of that? So I had mixed feelings in that first one. When the second one came, I went back with the same feelings, thinking that, oh, not again, but I'll just sit through it. But that was the one that changed me. That's the one that made me realize that my perspectives might be influenced by my experience just because I played with these white kids that maybe never saw me as different. just because in the Netherlands and in England and other places I was embraced and welcomed and allowed to participate in things, didn't mean that others might have very different experiences. It doesn't mean that there are people out there that are even much more ignorant than the woman who say we dance around pots boiling water. And two things changed, two experiences of that training. The first one was the video that we watched that helped clarify white privilege. It was the video about the race. And it made me realize that there's some things that happened historically that have led to some of the experiences that people of color experience in this country. So the second activity was when we had the coins at the table. And at the start of that activity, I remember looking around my table and I thought, oh yeah, I know where this is going. We're gonna pick this up. We're probably gonna answer some questions. And I'm doing all right. I'm just like them because I don't have some of the things that people might have. But at the end, when I was one of 3 people left with very few coins, I looked around the room. The rest of you were on one side, and I thought, oh my goodness. Is it true that it doesn't matter how hard I've worked? Is it true that it doesn't matter how educated I am or all these things I've done? Is it true that I lost the race even before it started? Mm-hmm. I went home and I could not look my husband in the eye. I didn't know how to feel about white people. I went to a website shortly after that to just look. I was trying to hire teachers and I saw a school that was hiring. I thought, well, let me see how they post their jobs. And I remember for the very first time, I noticed how white everybody was because they had these 2 pages. And that wasn't me before. Do I regret having gone through this training? No. It opened my eyes to things that are uncomfortable. But it made me realize that I cannot minimize the experience of others just because it wasn't my experience. Mm-hmm. And I want to be part of the conversation. I want to help us grow. I want us to help repair the ruins because they are ruined. Our walls are broken. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
So my story is that I didn't know what I didn't know when I entered into cultural development, and it's just been transformational in my life as well for the last 2 years, and I'm really looking forward to continuing walking in this journey with our local staff team here. So we've been working through Wave 2, and Wave 3 is going to be beginning. And Wave 3 will look a little different. It won't be the large regional group meetings, but there will be more personal work that we do by ourselves and then opportunities to come together and process. So we have that coming up. But even as we finished that, we as a leadership team decided we didn't want to just kind of complete cultural development, say, check, we've done that, and move on. But we really want to make this our own here in the Twin Cities as a staff team. And really feeling like this is what we're called to as believers, this is what we're called to as navigators. Something that really opened my eyes was going through our values and just seeing how so many of them related to cultural development, all of them, in fact, either impacted how I approached cultural development or cultural development impacts how we can engage in those values. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to look at that and just see how interconnected this is to who we are as navigators. So as we seek to make this our own, it's not just for those we minister to, but it's also for our engagement with other believers, both our teammates, but also those in our churches. And I have just also come to realize that this is really important for myself as well in my relationship with God and for my own development. So this is about relating to others as well as relating to God and to myself. So as we come together as a staff team and seek to make this our own, we're going to be providing some ongoing opportunities for engagement in cultural development and growth in this area. And we're going to just start out with opportunities for working with the Wave 2 homework together. Maybe some of you have already completed it. I know I haven't even started it. So we're going to start with a movie night to watch Hidden Figures. We're really looking forward. It'll be on November 3rd, and we'll have some details about it later. And we'll just discuss it after watching the movie. If you haven't watched the movie, you can just come to the discussion, and then we'll do a potluck after. And then after that, we'll continue to have opportunities for book discussion, for the homework for Wave 2, and some of the other opportunities moving into Wave 3 as well. And then we'll go from there. So I just want to thank you all for being a part of this journey with me. I've been really grateful for how God has been working in this area in my life. And I know you all are a part of that, having walked through the waves with us. And so I look forward to continuing in this journey with you. And I have a slide that says that one of our initiatives is ongoing citywide cultural development. So.
Well, before I start, I just want to acknowledge Susie and just say thank you for being so vulnerable and open. It's not easy to share about things in our lives that are personal, but it's extra difficult to share about things that have been hard. So I just want to thank you for that. And I pray that God would use your story, as he already has been, to help all of us to grow. So what we're going through now, if in case it's not clear, is the first, so is goal B. So I do goal B first. There are 3 initiatives that go with each of them. And I just shared the first, and then I'm going to talk about the second. So as you can read, it's a church initiative, and, right? Yeah, okay. This is a quote that I just saw online, the other day, but my neighbor is not he whom I find in my path, but rather he in whose path I place myself, he whom I approach and actively seek. Jesus talks about being a neighbor, right? And sometimes if we just go about our lives, we only see certain kinds of people. And so this really is about seeing everyone. So I'm actually going to be joining Navigator Church Ministries. Who's heard of NCM before? Yeah, okay, right. So I was in the hands down group myself, actually. And through a different set of circumstances, God helped me find out about NCM. I met the leaders of it. But the ministry and the vision of NCM is actually really cool. So the vision is growing disciple-making people and cultures through churches in every U.S. city to impact our world. So everybody, I'm almost sure, is part of some kind of church body, right? And we all long to see our church bodies also being part of the discipleship-making movement, right? Disciple-making movements. And there's statistics like there's only 50% of people who actually sit in church pews who have a personal relationship with God. Okay, so it's not like, oh, these are churched and these are unchurched. It's like, it's a mix these days. In our city alone, there are all different kinds of churches. I don't know the exact number, but I'm guessing it's in the thousands, right? There's lots of churches. How many of them are actually intentionally making disciples? So Navigator Church Ministries has a number of different programs, and I won't go through them all, but you can read about them later. But it's really about helping churches develop cultures of disciple making. So what NCM knows is clear in a lot of ways. They know how to reach mainstream white evangelical churches really well. They've got tons of materials and resources. I put some there on the welcome table. They're also doing some more things with African American churches and Latino churches around the country. What they don't know, actually, there is literally one other staff other than me now who works with Asian American churches, and he works with Asian immigrant churches. So there's literally no staff in the U.S. working with Asian Americans, 2nd generation or 3rd generation Americans. So it's not that we think the resources won't be helpful or the strategies won't work, we just don't know. And you can't do something unless you know, right? So we also don't know what we can learn from these churches. Every culture brings something specific and beautiful to the kingdom of God. That part we are all on board with. So we also recognize we have a lot to learn from each other, and so that's part of what I'll be doing. I'm not going to go into all this right now, but this is just to tell you that there have been churches in the Twin Cities area that have expressed interest in working with the Navigators. You guys, the Navigators have a good reputation so far. So good, right? They think we're trustworthy. They think we're reliable. They think we're Bible-based, So, and we're not denominational, so we can work with anybody. There are 50 to 60 Hmong American churches in the Twin Cities right now. 50 to 60. Okay. 90% of the Karen that are in the Twin Cities are Baptists. Okay. So it's an amazing field that we have here that I really feel like is untapped. So as a leadership team, we really want to be seeing how we can start building relationships with these churches. Yeah. So during our table time, at my table, we'll be talking about what resources you guys already have, because you bring not just questions, I think, but you also resources with you. So if you have connections, if you have ideas, if you have things that you want to talk about, please join me at our table. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. So I like the analogy of a big hat and a little hat, and what you're seeing from Anna and Jane and others is they're representing their little hat. Like Tim, your big hat is I'm a collegiate navigator staff. Being on my leadership team is a second hat. They might be giving 10% of their time to that. Jane more. For me, my big hat is the team, and my little hat is working with Jane with Hmong churches, which we'll be getting into. So you've heard two of the initiatives for Goal B. We started with Goal B. Now you're going to hear the third from Anna and myself. We're going to talk about money. When I was the NAV 20s director, some of you don't know that I did that, but I lived in Colorado Springs. And one of my jobs was to keep a track of people's funding balances. So I could see everybody's accounts. I wanted to make sure that people had healthy funding. And it didn't take very long to see that the majority of our staff did have healthy funding. But then there was a smaller cross-section that was always struggling with their funding. And it tended to be single women and people of color, generally by percentage. Well, I was at a gathering of mission directors, and a mission director, who's no longer a mission director from another mission, said, well, we never have deficit problems. We never have any staff in deficit. I said, well, how do you do that? He said, well, every year we ask people who aren't in deficit to throw in money and we wipe them out. So that got me thinking, and I was having a quiet time in 2 Corinthians 8, and I decided to read what the message said. Normally I don't read what you can see already, but I'm going to read it. It said, Paul says, you've got what it takes to finish it up, so go to it. Once the commitment is clear, you do what you can, not what you can't. The heart regulates the hands. This isn't so others can take it easy while you sweat it out. No, you're shoulder to shoulder with them all the way. Your surplus matching their deficit, their surplus matching your deficit. In the end, you come out even. Nothing left over to the one with the most, nothing lacking to the one with the least. So what we're really talking about, whether it's cultural development or money or partnerships with churches, we're talking about doing things as a family, taking a family approach. So the Navigators are excellent at fundraising. Other organizations come to the Navigators to learn how to raise money. It works great for most people, but it's a very individualized approach. As I started praying and talking to my team in NAV 20s about the realities in our mission, this is what we discovered. We had 40 staff in our mission. 34 of those staff had a total surplus of $260,000. 6 staff had a total deficit of $25,000. And what we realized is that 10% of the surplus in the blue column could wipe out the deficits for those in the red column. I was talking to Marvin Campbell, that was 3 years ago, and he said in the Navigators, there's $11 million of surplus in Navigator accounts. Over here, there's $800,000 of deficit in these other accounts. So we got to stop saying we don't have the money. We have the money, we just have a very individualized, either an individualized personal approach or a city approach or a team or a mission approach. A very Americanized approach to money, actually. So what we did, and I'm going to just recap it a little bit, and it's something that we're going to offer to you in a similar way in the city, is we asked people, would you do your very best with your year-end giving letters? Would you wrap your heart around this idea of approaching money as a family? And in February, we'll do a free will offering. I'll ask everybody in surplus, there's going to be no guilting into anything is a free will offering. Would you consider helping this account to wipe out the deficit? And what happened was we raised $33,000 to wipe out $25,000 in deficit. And for the rest of the year, nobody was in deficit again. We had little measures in there because we didn't want people to have too big of a budget and then be in deficit 3 months later. We did all those things, but it actually worked. And now I think there's 4 other missions doing it. So we'd like to do something similar in our city. In February, we're going to ask you as a city, just like you would if a missionary was visiting your church or if you're at a conference, would you consider looking at your account and what could I do, either with my Navigator money or my personal money, not to wipe out deficits, but to fund an account that would make us a more appealing city, more family-oriented to people of color who don't have contacts. In America, the average white individual has a 10 times larger net worth than the average Hispanic individual, a 12 times greater net worth than an African American individual. So it's not just what you know, it's who you know. If we're talking funding, how do you go fishing in the stream if there's no fish? Some people just don't know people. So we're going to be looking at other things in our city, like I would love to take people on appointments with me if they don't have people to talk to with funding. This is another approach. We're going to have a free will offering. That personally motivates me to get out of my deficit and to think about the rest of my team with my own fundraising. We have a staff couple in our city who's already given $5,000 as a nest egg to start this account. It's going to become called the MSP People of Color and Indigenous account, MSP POCI account. It's already an account. There's already $5,000 in it.
So another thing we're going to start doing is inspired by a conversation we had with the Albuquerque NAV staff team, and just learning about the family approach that they take to funding as a whole. So one of the things that we're going to copy from them is their monthly funding breakfasts, with the idea we're all working on this. We all know we're working on it, but we all work on it kind of individually, and we want to come together and be able to encourage one another and work on it together as a family. So everything is better with food, so it'll be with breakfast. So it'll be for the purpose of encouragement, for accountability, and we're really hoping that as we come together and work on it together, we'll be able to generate new ideas and be able to spur one another on in this area. It can be a really hard area, I think, for all of us. Funding is always a challenge, and so we want to kind of come together and bring it out into the open and allow a place for conversation. And something I've kind of just a mental picture been thinking about is a barn raising. You know, whole communities would come together to help raise a barn, and then they would go to someone else's and raise that barn. So let's come together and raise our barns together and not try and just be building our own barn by ourselves. So this will be rolling out the beginning of 2019. We don't have the details yet, but we wanted to let you know that this is coming, and we would love to have your input about ideas about when or where or how we go about this. So we'll look forward to doing it with you.
Great. Now, this is the elective time, so you've heard 3 different initiatives, and this isn't a few people might try to get you to sign up for something, but this is really like to learn more and actually to give your own voice to some of these ideas. With a few of them, we might have some specific needs right now. With this funding initiative in particular, I think we just want to talk to each other about it, and we'd actually like a team member or 2 to join us. So what we're going to do now, I don't think we can just do it by table because I'm not sure how many people will go to each one. But if you're interested in learning more about this funding initiative, would you please come over here? We'll start with this table and we'll expand it if we need to. If you'd like to learn more about future cultural development, Jane will be at this table here. We'll start here where Susie is. And if you'd like to learn more about partnerships with churches, people of color initiatives, right here with Jane. So, any questions? If you need a bathroom break, that's just fine, but we're going to only do a campus, or how do you really make this thing go wherever in a city, I thought it comes down to staff. The staff are important, but ultimately, the people who are really going to carry our calling and the gospel forward are the non-staff, the conventional income people in a country or in a city. Everyday people, moms and dads, employees, neighbors, living out the NAV DNA that's been planted in them wherever they go. About a year ago, I asked you to think about who are some of these people in our city, people that you know, the people on your mailing list, the people that were NAVs with you here at one time, involved with you in the city. And many of you helped us put a directory together. And that directory is now through phase 1. We have 464 households on a mailing list. And you'll hear a little bit more about this later, but all those people will be invited to the conference we're going to have. But more important than the conference is, how do we engage with these people in our city who, for the most part, only hear about the Navigators when they get your newsletter? Or they know about one part about what's happening in the city, or they know about something that happened years ago. Well, part of that's the communications team, but a lot of it is what Alec is going to talk about now. How do we learn from them and not just play pin the tail on the donkey and guess what it is that would help them feel resourced and developed? So Alec, would you come on up and share?
Well, 6 years ago, I was managing a pub in Seattle, and God used this passage, Ephesians 4:12, to lead me to come actually back on staff. And I was spending some time alone with God at a coffee shop, my favorite roaster, Lighthouse Roasters, and was reading this passage, and it was profound for me, not because I felt like it meant God was calling me to ministry. I was already doing ministry even as I was working at the pub, but because I felt like he was calling me to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And you know, the thing that's so profound about that for me is that it's these conventional income people doing all kinds of work all around the city and around the world who are called to ministry, and it's our opportunity to be able to equip them for that work that is so exciting for me. This last weekend I was at our NAV 20s national gathering, and we talked a little bit about the vision statement, which some of you may be familiar with. It's this long but pretty beautiful picture of what we see, what we anticipate and expect to come from our work with the Navigators. And one of the phrases that I think is so great there is this phrase of workers for the kingdom next door to everywhere. And Ben Nugent, our mission director, just exhorted us with the thought that we're not going to staff our way to that vision. We're not going to get there if we just try to get more and more staff. The reality is we need these conventional income people to help us see that happen. Some of you may have heard about the National Leadership Community Gathering that happened in the spring, and hopefully you've seen a summary video that went around. I know Chad sent it out. It was in NAV Weekly a couple weeks ago. If you haven't yet, I'd encourage you to look it up. It's a great just kind of snapshot of what happened that weekend, but Doug Nunke was talking especially about this idea of the sleeping giant. And what he was really talking about is these conventional income people all over the city and all over the world who, some of them may have a NAV background, some of them probably don't, but that they're out there, and we can engage them and wake them up and invite them into this great calling that we have as the Navigators. And so this initiative that we have really kind of comes down to that idea. It really comes down to this idea that we want to invite conventional income people to be a part of this work that we're doing and to take ownership of what we're doing. So Abby is a part of this team along with Luke. So Abby, why don't you come up, and she's going to share a little bit about how we are taking next steps with it.
So I think we'd be remiss if we just decided this is how we're going to get the average conventional income disciple maker to get involved, right? And we just decide that and we go about our business. We'd be remiss. So we decided the best thing to do would be to create a small cohort of CIDs, conventional income disciple makers, and ask them. So what do you need to be able to connect, to be developed, to be resourced? What would that look like for you? So our goal is to get to go to about 40 CIDs, hoping to get maybe about 25 or 30 of them to commit to being part of this, we're calling it a cohort, where they'll give us input. And we're hoping to have that before the end of this calendar year, that input. And then the leadership team would synthesize that information and then begin creating those avenues for them to have a way to be involved and to not sleep anymore.
Yeah, so after we've kind of sought some of that input from a number of people around the city, we really want to come up with ways that we can work towards this goal of, connecting with them, resourcing them, and developing them. And so we've got all kinds of ideas of things like training seminars and learning cohorts and things that we've talked about, but we really want to take this input that we get to apply that and come up with some of these avenues. And really the bottom line is that what that results in is that conventional income disciple makers take ownership of what we're doing. And more we're getting them involved, we're giving them contribution, we're giving them voice into what we're doing. And we'd love to see things like CIDs on our leadership team, doing things at this conference that we'll be talking about, taking all kinds of opportunities to own the work that we're doing alongside us.
Yeah, but we can't do it on our own. We can't do it without you. So we have two big requests of you. Are there names of people, CIDs, that conventional income disciple makers, that that could be part, potentially, of this cohort? Now, when we define who we're looking for, it comes down to a couple things. We're looking for people who are a cross of different ethnicities, different vocations, different genders. We're looking for people primarily between 30 and 45 years of age. And we're looking for somebody that really has a passion for the navigator calling. Doesn't mean they have a navigator background or are currently involved with the NAVs, but they have that same DNA. So those three pieces, do you know 3 people that you could give us their names? And you're not committing them. We would just reach out and share more with them about that. That's our first need. Our second need is, would you be willing to take a couple minutes to pause in your world? I'm speaking so much to myself when I say that, but pause and say, what are ways people could get involved with my mission? What are ways that people could come alongside me? Because we can't reach everybody next door to everywhere on our own. So as a mission, as a ministry, do you have a top list of 5 needs? Maybe that would be somebody leading a Bible study on your collegiate campus, or maybe in the 20s that would be city leader coming alongside and leading a group. What would be a need that you have? And we're going to reach out to you by October 8th and see what those needs are. Because how great would it be if we could go to CIDs and say, here's a list of our needs. Such a range. Where is your talent? Where is your passion? We want you to get involved. And that could just be the doorway into more involvement. So those are our 2 needs. If you want to learn more about it, we'll be at the table as well.
Abby gets to stay up. So as we, behind me. She's fast. As we thought about actually both of our objectives, objective A and B, well, the idea that just kept coming up is this idea of having a great city conference like we've had so many years here in Minneapolis, and to think in terms of what is our NAV main contribution to the body. And as we've thought about that, it keeps coming back to us. Well, people say life-to-life discipleship, because discipleship's very common in the body of Christ. But oftentimes what you learn is people feel discipled by a book or a professor or something like that. So how can we capture that in some way in a conference, pour into people? And as I've heard Bruce say, and I've just noticed before, there are people who can feel kind of lonely laboring, but to have one day where they're around other people who are like-hearted and they're hearing what they came to believe years ago, for me, it can float my boat for months. So it's a connection point, it's a way to develop and resource, but it's also a way just to get that charge and to make connections. The conference is going to be March 30th at Christ Presbyterian Church, our home church. Our speakers, our international president, Mutua Mahini, And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the objectives and some of the makeup of the conference in a second.
So conferences are not anything new to the NABS, right? This isn't a whole new concept. We've done them, we will continue to do them, but we want them to be a mainstay. We want them to be part of the rhythm of our MSP NABS. That's a big part of who we are. We want, though, to broaden the opportunity to create visibility as NABS within the city, to recruit people, to create more ownership and partnership. Chad has said to me before, we don't just want to be an alumni association for NABS. We want to create ownership amongst all of us, the diversity within the city. So that is our deeper desire within this. It isn't just to do another conference.
Yeah, I'm not going to read all the objectives, but these were some of the things that we felt were most important for the conference. As I mentioned, focusing on that distinctive of life-to-life discipleships, from Mutwa's talks to the elective seminars that we'll have. Conventional income disciple makers feeling treasured as navigators, like, wow, this is for us, I feel valued here. And creating connection points so they don't just leave and wonder what's next. So they're connecting with you and your mission, connecting with our city in a way that they know what some next steps can be. Some principles and values that we will ruthlessly, at least do our best to make important in the conference are, we want women and people of color to not only participate, but to have significant ownership in leading the conference and platform time. We want it to be family and kid friendly. We don't want it to be a conference where the dads come and the moms stay home with the kids. So that's where we need your help. Call 911. No. Call now. But seriously, we don't want it to just be childcare. We want it to be discipling kids. I have this idea that every kid who can do it's going to memorize a Bible verse. We'll do that somehow in some way. Some highlights, or not just highlights, but what to expect. It's going to be from 9 to 3. We decided rather than making an overnight conference with this one, let's keep costs down. There's a balance of how early you start because we want to squeeze it all in, but we wanted it to be feasible for someone from Mankato or Rochester or Eau Claire to make the drive and come to the conference. It's from 9 to 3. We'll have 2 sets of elective seminars. We'll have local leaders. We'll have mission leaders from Colorado. It'll be a diversity of seminars. Like I said, we want to make it affordable, and we're going to have a castle bouncy house for the kids.
When is it?
March 30th, 2018. It's a Saturday.
Inside, it'll be in the
Oh,
gym.
inside.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I know what that too.
It's hard to say.
So we have already made a lot of progress on this, solidifying the speaker, the location, the date. We've got, you'll notice we're passing around the save the date cards. A lot of this has to do with Leon, who you met, Molly, Chad spearheading this, Matt, and his involvement. So we need your help. There's a couple ways that you could get involved. If you want to be part of the childcare and discipleship. So when we say that, childcare, we're meaning, yes, make sure they're safe, they don't hurt themselves, but also discipling them, doing some material with them, teaching them something throughout the day. Now, it's a long day, it's a 6-hour day, so we were thinking if people could take 2-hour chunks. So if we could get a lot of people involved, shorter period of time, nobody will be burned out by the end of the day. And if we can get others outside of ourselves to help with the childcare, we would provide that seminar cost for free then for them, if they were able to give 2 hours of their time. We're also looking for people to help with logistics and setup, the hospitality team, and registration and check-in assistant we're looking for. But the biggest thing, if I was to say at this moment, we definitely want people involved, but we need you to personally invite people. So that's why we bundled up the save the dates and are asking you, would you please do a word of mouth? Keep those cards on you wherever you go, in your backpack, in your purse, when you're out and about, talking to people. Now, we are sending these out to our directory, which is 466 families. It's okay if they receive one in the mail and then they get one from you. They might be like, It's meant to be. I'm supposed to go.
Yes.
Yes, you are. So we want them to get touched multiple times, invited, and personally told why they would benefit from this. So we at our table are going to give you opportunities to learn more about the needs before you would ever commit to helping one of those ways. But more than anything, if you would take those cards with you and hand those out, we would greatly appreciate that.
We will email you the directory it's going to, so if you want to reference that to remember who's getting one, someone you might be talking to. The other part with the childcare, there's going to be so many needs with the children's ministry part. My wife's actually the children's ministry director at our church, so I'm looking at ways to bring in people who actually know how to run things in that church. It's going to take, as Hillary Clinton would say, it's going to take a village to make this thing work for kids, but we don't want to do it halfway. We want people to come back and say, wow, like that was great for our kids. And I haven't been to a conference that way before, so, but it's going to take faith and participation. So Matt's going to come up and talk about communications.
Told Chad I didn't have too many things to say, particularly about communications, other than just to kind of talk broad level, big picture. So you've already met a few people on the team. Leon will be directing the communications team for the Navigator movement in the city. And then Molly will be doing graphic design for half her time, which is huge. And the piece you have in front of you is a product of her hard work, along with Leon. They put together and built this postcard, which I think is stellar. And it will be, right? Yeah. It'll be helping us accomplish some of what we long to do, which is to see disciple makers next door to everywhere, right? At the end of the day, we want to see the Lord glorified, His kingdom come through disciple makers next door to everywhere. And communications is a key part of that. So also Bjorn Hansen, he's a conventional income disciple maker. He wants to labor right where God has him. And God's gifted him with skills beyond software development, also photography and video. And he's going to leverage those skills for the sake of the disciple making movement that God's called us to in the city. I'm thrilled about that. I'm super excited. And so Leon, Molly, and Bjorn will be part of that team. And I'm just kind of the leadership team uplink, making sure that we set our goals together and we stay on course with where we want to go in terms of the movement in the city of making disciples. And communications is a key part of that. So when I think about a simple illustration to understand how communications plays into a lot of what we're talking about in all of these initiatives, I think of a trellis and a vine. And a vine is organic, it just grows its way, it needs to do its thing. And that's the Navigator movement that we long to see, of disciple making, to see the Lord glorified, to see the gospel advanced. But it needs some structure to grow on and to be healthy and to branch out and to really be prosperous. And so communications is a simple part of a trellis to help the movement really grow and expand. And so it's really kind of spidered in and connected to everything that we're talking about, all these initiatives, all these different pieces. Communications will be a key part of leveraging that. Not just communicating with all of you in the city, but also what we've been talking about, these conventional income people who want to make disciples right where God has them, all over the city, even beyond the city, in the region. And so we need to connect with them to be able to resource and develop them. So we have to communicate in order to connect. And this postcard is just one example of us getting this team off the ground to be able to fuel the movement of disciple making in the city. So that's just kind of a high level picture of how it's going to work, but it's going to help us accomplish those two main goals: to connect, develop, and resource conventional income disciple makers, and then to increase ownership and engagement of disciple makers among people of color and indigenous peoples in the city and our region. So that's how it ties in. I just wanted to share briefly about that, but I'm super excited about where we're going. So.
Thanks, Matt, and that's a good segue. I forgot to mention, so what you have is the Save the Date card. There will be future emails, there'll be other mailings. Registration will go live in January. So this is just to kind of pump the prime, especially with people who haven't heard from us in a while. But not too far down the road, they'll get emails. They can opt out of future emails. But as you talk to your friends, just tell them more information's on the way. Registration doesn't go live till January. But this is kind of a mark your calendar, get excited, save the date type thing. So now we're going to take 10 to 15 minutes. We're rounding third and heading home. The Brewers scored 3 people on a wild pitch the other night. Did I mention that? Amazing. Hopefully this isn't a wild pitch. There might be a wild pitch at one of the tables, a pitch to be on their team. But the conference team's going to meet right here. Where's Alec? Alec, if you're interested in what Alec shared and Abby shared, Abby will probably be with me, but Alec over in that corner. And then Matt over there. And after 10 or 15 minutes, I'll come up, share a few announcements, and then Pam will tell us what's going on with our meal. Think little hats. Could this be a little hat for you?